Now, the greatest radio shows of all time.
Suspense.
The Shadow Node.
Washington calling David Harding, counter-spy.
Classic radio theater.
The Great Gildersleeve.
Fibber McGee and Molly.
Dragnet. Gunsmoke.
The Lone Ranger.
Now, step back into a time machine with your host, Wyatt Cox.
Good evening, friends of the Inner Sanctum.
An episode of radio's outstanding theater of thrills, Suspense. This episode is entitled A Good and Faithful Servant. A story of theft, a story of robbery, and of course the star of this show is that fine dramatic actor, Jack Benny. You heard me right. Jack Benny in this episode of Suspense from June 2nd, 1952. Thank you for tuning in on this Friday. It is the second day of June, 153rd day of the year, 212 days remaining until we get to 2024. The first smallpox vaccine in North America given on this date in 1800. P.T. Barnum and his circus began their first tour of the U.S. in 1835. In 1886, President Grover Cleveland married Frances Folsom in the White House, becoming the only president to wed in the executive mansion. Marconi received a patent for his new invention on this date in 1896, the radio. Now, President Coolidge signed the Indian Citizenship Act into law in 1924, granting citizenship to all Native Americans born within the territorial limits of the U.S. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II of the U.K., first ever to be televised on this date in 1953, tons of radio coverage wall-to-wall as well. In 1965, the first contingent of Australian combat troops arrived in South Vietnam. 1966, Surveyor 1 landed on the moon, becoming the first U.S. spacecraft to soft land on another world. Also in 1979, Pope John Paul II visited his native Poland, becoming the first pope to visit a communist country. In 1990, the Lower Ohio Valley tornado outbreak spawned 88 confirmed tornadoes in Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. 12 people were killed. Petersburg, Indiana, the hardest hit town in the outbreak, with 6 deaths. Air Force Captain Scott O'Grady's F-16 shot down over Bosnia on this date in 1995 while patrolling the NATO no-fly zone. Now, in Denver on this date in 1997, Timothy McVeigh, convicted on 15 counts of murder and conspiracy for his role in the 1995 terrorist bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City.
Guilty of count 1, guilty of conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction. Count 2, guilty, use of a weapon of mass destruction, guilty. Count 3, destruction by explosive, guilty. Do you find that the government proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the crimes committed by Timothy McVeigh resulted in the death of one or more of the persons named in the indictment? Yes. First question is yes. This could kick in the death penalty. Second question, answer is yes, then the death of such persons was a foreseeable result of the defendant's criminal conduct.
McVeigh would be executed 4 years later. 1998, the CIH computer virus discovered in Taiwan, and in 2004, Ken Jennings began his 74-game winning streak on the syndicated game show Jeopardy! His total earnings, $3,022,700. Today, that money would be $4.8 million today. Passing away on this date in history, Lou Gehrig, the wonderful actor Gene Herschel, and fine humanitarian George F. Kaufman, the playwright, actor Leo Gorcey of the Dead End Kids, also band leader Sammy Kaye, Swing and Sway with Sammy Kaye. Andres Segovia, the Spanish guitarist. Jack Gilford, a fine character actor. Also actor Rex Harrison. Ray Combs, comedian but best known for his time on Family Feud. Actress Imogene Coca, the pencil neck geek. Freddie Blassie, nothing but a pencil neck geek. He was ahead of his time. Also, singer-songwriter, guitarist Bo Diddley, actor Mel Ferrer, and Richard Dawson. So 2 Family Feud hosts passing away on this date in history. Although I will say Richard Dawson, a wonderful host on the Family Feud, but what I will also tell you is that his time on Match Game was exceptional. Now, among birth dates on this date, the first Lady, Martha Washington, author Marquis de Sade, Pope Pius X, composer Edward Elgar, swimmer, actor Johnny Weissmuller, the original not the original Tarzan, but he was the best-known Tarzan in the motion pictures. Also, Walter Tetley. My goodness, he was something. Also, football team president, Dallas Cowboys Tex Schramm, astronaut Pete Conrad, Hot Lips in the motion picture MASH, Sally Kellerman, singer Jimmy Jones, and Marvin Hamlisch had a hit record with a very old song, The Entertainer. Now, we mentioned that this was the birth date of Johnny Weissmuller, another Tarzan in the 1966 TV show, Ron Ely, who also starred in the movies as Doc Savage. Ron Ely, 85 today. He was Mike Hammer on television, Stacy Keach, 82. The Beaver, Jerry Mathers, 75 today. Dana Carvey, who did such a wonderful impression of George Herbert Walker Bush, the first Bush president. He is 68 today. Pro wrestler who's gone through a lot in his life, Lex Luger, 65 today. Race car driver Kyle Petty is 63. From Spandau Ballet, Tony Hadley is 63. From Whose Line Is It Anyway? And the current Let's Make a Deal host, Wayne Brady, 51. Spock in the 2009 Star Trek reboot, Zach Quinto is 46 today. He was also in the TV show Heroes. WWE's AJ Styles, 46 today. Can you believe he does what he does at 46? And from Firefly, Jewel State is 41. Now, those just a few of the people celebrating the second day of June is their birthday. If this is your birthday...
Hi, we're the 4 freshmen, and we just want to say... Happy birthday to you!
And from 71 years ago today, June 2nd, 1952, radio's outstanding theater of thrill suspense, Jack Benny starring in A Good and Faithful Servant. That's up next on this Friday Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite radio station. Quick word before we get started here. I want to thank Robert and Susie for their Buy Me a Coffee contributions. You go above and beyond making sure that our show can remain here, not only on your favorite radio station, but online. Now, speaking of online, if you go to classicradio.stream, you can see the short little thing I wrote about Jack Benny being on Suspense 4 times. He was first on in 1951 in Murder in G-Flat. He did this appearance that you're hearing today, A Good and Faithful Servant, on July 2nd, 1952, 71 years ago today. His third appearance was a science fiction episode, Plan X, February 2nd, 1953. And the final Benny appearance was on January 18th, 1954, The Face is Familiar. And I wrote, high comedy the shows weren't, but they attracted a nice audience at a time when radio's audiences were falling. Elliot Lewis, as producer-director, was able to still get Hollywood's finest to take a fling at stepping outside their regular box and taking a flyer on doing something different, like when Fibber McGee and Molly starred in the episode Backseat Driver on February 3rd, 1949. And now you know why Jack Benny was on Suspense. It was Elliot Lewis. And now we bring you the start of this episode of Suspense, June 2nd, 1952, 71 years ago today, Jack Benny, A Good and Faithful Servant.
Autolite and its 98,000 dealers bring you Mr. Jack Benny in tonight's presentation of Suspense. Tonight, Autolite presents a story about a man who worked for 30 years to prepare a most unique personal retirement plan. The story is called A Good and Faithful Servant. Our star, Mr. Jack Benny. And now, with the performance of Mr. Jack Benny, Autolite presents transcribed A Good and Faithful Servant, hoping once again to keep you in suspense.
I know you've been through a lot, Mr. Fenton, but if you could just try to recall anything else about the appearance of the two men.
Lieutenant, couldn't this wait? Fenton has spent 14 horrible hours locked in a vault, and while I admire his spirit and pluck in bearing up as well as he has...
I'm just trying to get something to go on, Mr. Waterman. Do you want your money back, or don't you?
The welfare of my employees comes first, Lieutenant. First, last, and always.
And you're insured. Mr. Fenton.
Don't answer if you don't feel up to it, Fenton.
I don't mind, Mr. Waterman. I'm anxious to cooperate. Now, as near as I can remember...
Be sure you get this, Florence.
As near as I can remember... Of course, I had only a flash before they forced me into the vault.
We understand, Mr. Fenton.
I had the impression of one being tall, but not too tall, and the other one was shorter.
But not too short.
Exactly. And they were wearing masks, rubber masks. One had a Lionel Barrymore mask, and I think the other was Dick Tracy. It was quite a shock to see him.
Aha. The Brinks Gang, Lieutenant. The Brinks Gang to a T.
Maybe. Mr. Cartwright, would you come over here, please? Mr. Cartwright, is it the practice to keep large sums of cash on hand overnight at the store?
Well, yes, the store does a tremendous cash business, Lieutenant. Tremendous.
And yesterday was Dollar Day.
Thank you. Mr. Cartwright, how did it happen that Fenton was alone in the cash room when the bandits entered? Did he customarily close the vault for the night?
Well, not customarily, no. When I'm unavoidably called away from the store...
Does this happen often?
Well,
very seldom, Lieutenant. Very seldom.
But it happened yesterday. And two men walked in, put you in the vault, and walked out with a big hunk of money.
At precisely 5:56. Mr. Cartwright opened the vault this morning at 8:02.
Correct, Lieutenant. We won't know how much they got until I can make an audit.
And if there's any question, Lieutenant, of corroborating Fenton's story, I need only to say that he's been with Waterman's for 30 years, a good and faithful servant.
More exactly, Mr. Waterman, 29 years, 11 months, and 29 days. I was due to retire tomorrow before this unfortunate circumstance arose,
Nonsense, Fenton. You'll retire tomorrow. And if there's any question, Lieutenant, of Fenton's character, his honesty, his devotion...
Yeah, sure. You can go home, Mr. Fenton. Better get some rest. If you want to duck the reporters, go out this back way.
Well, what do you think, Mr. Waterman?
Entirely up to you, my boy, entirely. But in these days of doubt, of confusion, and dishonesty in high places, I believe your simple story of courage and devotion to duty will be an inspiration everywhere.
Mr. Waterman, I am ready to face the press. They were all very nice to me. The reporters, the police, Mr. Cartwright, and especially Mr. Waterman. All that money missing. $50,000. Yet his only concern was for me. I thought that if I could afford it, I'd like to buy him some little token of gratitude. Then I thought again. In my desk at the office, there was a secret compartment, and in that compartment was $50,000. I guess I could afford it. Yoo-hoo! Mother, I'm home.
Good morning, Harold. I hope you haven't had breakfast. I've kept it hot for you.
You're not going to ask me how it went, Mother?
Oh, I heard over the radio. But I wish there'd been some way of doing it that it wouldn't have kept you out all night.
Oh, I wasn't out all night, Mother. I was in a vault.
I know you were, Harold. And if you keep on, you're going to end up with that same sinus strip your father used to have.
Oh, Mother, it was a perfectly dry, warm... Oh, never mind.
Eat your cereal, Harold. You'll feel better.
Mr. Waterman told me to take the day off, Mother. I'm not going in until tomorrow.
That was certainly big of him, after all you've done for them. How much did you get?
$50,000. It's in my desk at the office, in the drawer with the false bottom.
In your desk? Will it be safe there, Harold?
Well, no one will be looking for it.
Harold, you don't think you'll have any trouble getting the money out of your desk?
I think things will work out all right. See, according to my plan,
Harold, you see, I told you from the beginning you weren't strong enough for this type of thing.
The next morning at 8:43, I punched in at the store. Figuring 308 working days a year, that made 9,240 punches. It was a little strange to think of this being my last. I walked through the store to the elevator, past lingerie, ladies' gloves, and perfume the way I always went. But this morning was different. People looked up when I passed. They spoke to me. They knew who I was. Even the brunette in perfume smiled at me. I almost stopped, but I couldn't think of anything to say. In the elevator, one of the girls asked me how I felt. Still scared, I said, and they laughed. They wouldn't have laughed any harder for Mr. Waterman. I got out at 8, my floor, and as I went into my office, Miss Prentice, Mr. Cartwright's secretary, looked at me. 23 months and 2 days she'd been looking at the top of my head, but this morning she looked at me. And she smiled. I guess I smiled back.
Good morning, Mr. Fenton.
Good morning, Miss Prentice. It wasn't much, but I felt it could have been a start. I was almost sorry this was my last day.
Fenton, did you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Cartwright. I heard you, Mr. Cartwright.
All right. A big workload piled up yesterday when you took off, and we haven't anyone new coming in till tomorrow. Not that I want to overload you on your last day.
An honest day's work for an honest day's pay, Mr. Cartwright.
Oh, good. I'm still trying to find out how much was taken in the holdup, so you're on your own.
I think I can tell you almost to the penny, Mr. Cartwright.
I'll make my own check. And how about the work Oh, good morning, Mr. Waterman. I was just,
Well, Fenton, back at the old desk, eh?
Well, I just didn't feel right away from it, Mr. Waterman.
Hey, I got a surprise for you this afternoon, Fenton. Going to make a little ceremony out of your retirement.
A ceremony?
Good for store morale. Right, Cartwright?
Oh, absolutely, Mr. Waterman, absolutely.
And about that request of yours you made last week, Fenton, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if we can swing it.
Oh, you're too kind, Mr. Waterman.
Oh, my boy, when you work for Waterman's 30 years, you've got something coming to you.
No. Really? I ate my usual lunch that day, the Thursday Blue Plate Special at Elmo's Grotto. 70 cents plus the usual 10% tip. 7 cents. With the usual 20 minutes left in my lunch hour, I headed for the park with a nickel bag of peanuts. The squirrels were going to miss me. No, Mr. Waterman. You've had 3 already. Give Mr. Cartwright a chance. Sit up, Mr. Cartwright. Sit. That's it. That's it.
Excuse me. Would you mind if I join you, Mr. Fenton?
Why, Miss Prentice. Of course. Of course not. Sit down.
Thank you.
Move over, Mr. Waterman.
He does look a little pompous, doesn't he? Which one is Mr. Cartwright?
There, with the small mustache. He bites.
And, is there a Miss Prentice?
Well, there is, but I believe she is, well...
Nesting?
Well...
How long have you been feeding them, Mr. Fenton? They seem so friendly.
30 years, Miss Prentice. My favorite animal. You give a squirrel a nut, and does he eat it? No. He runs away and stores it in a hole. We could all benefit from their example.
And now that you've stored your little nest egg, you're retiring, Mr. Fenton.
Well, you might say that, yes.
You're quite a fascinating character, Mr. Fenton.
Me?
I'm sorry I didn't know you sooner. You know, the whole store is talking about your ordeal in that vault.
Oh, it wasn't so bad. In fact, I've always rather liked the vault.
What an odd thing to say.
Well, chacun est son goût, Miss Prentice. That's French for each to his own taste.
Oh, you've been abroad, Mr. Fenton.
Me? Oh, my goodness, no.
Oh, but you will now that you're retiring.
No, I've got my eye on a little cottage by a lake and woods. Lots of squirrels there. And no time clocks.
You and your wife?
Mother.
Oh, I hope you get it, Mr. Fenton.
Thank you, Miss Prentice.
I wonder what the robbers are going to do with all that money.
I wonder. 5-1. Shall we go back and punch in, Miss Prentice? let me walk all the way back to the store with her. And in the elevator, Mr. Bixler, Sporting Goods, winked at me. Funny, for 10 years I'd had the feeling Mr. Bixler didn't like me.
From June 2nd, 1952, radio's outstanding theater of thrills, Suspense, A Good and Faithful Servant, starring Jack Benny, here on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. We'll have the news from 71 years ago today and the conclusion of Suspense following these messages from your favorite radio station. Just going to take a minute here to tell you about the big savings going on now, the clearance sale at mypillow.com. And you know, I've talked about how in my office I have a pair of my slippers, and they're really comfortable, and they're on clearance right now. The mypillow.com slippers, $25 a pair, limit 10. And I would buy 3 or 4 more pairs. Unfortunately, they're out of my size. They also have sheets, pillowcases, clothing items, all on special right now. Go to mypillow.com, click on the clearance tab at the top of the page, use my promo code Wyatt, or call 1-800-928-4715. Limited sizes remaining in the MyPillow slippers, limited colors on other items. mypillow.com, clearance tab, promo code Wyatt, 1-800-928-4715. Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite station. Want to remind you our website, classicradio.stream. Our social media links are there, so you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. We're listening this hour to an episode of Suspense, Jack Benny starring in A Good and Faithful Servant, as it was originally broadcast Monday, June 2nd, 1952, and I believe it's 8 o'clock Eastern Time. In the newspapers of that Monday, 71 years ago, these were some of the headlines. Flashing his famous smile, General Dwight David Eisenhower came home yesterday and plunged into a final round of conferences which will cut his military ties and free him to take an active role in the campaign for the Republican presidential nomination. Military pomp and circumstance dominated the return, but those who saw him watched for political significance in every move, and word of the Kansan who shed his uniform Tuesday. Then he heads home to Abilene, Kansas, for his first public address and the open arena of politics. The Republic of Korean government today appeared ready to close down the National Assembly if the legislative body doesn't support President Syngman Rhee. A full battalion of South Korean National Police, between 500 and 600 men, arrived in the provisional capital of Busan over the weekend, ostensibly to attend a police convention. Government laborers dug up paths in front of the assembly hall and spread a new asphalt surface over a road between the hall and other Capitol buildings. Some assemblymen, afraid to go home, slept in the assembly chambers last night. Rhee and the assembly have been feuding for months. He declared martial law recently and had 12 assemblymen arrested, 11 without formal charges, but with a vague reference to a communist plot. Ceylon's Prime Minister Dudley Senanayak victorious anti-leftist government may plug a leak through which nearly 15,000 long tons of Ceylonese rubber has been shipped to communist China in the past 8 months. Senanayak, who led his United National Party to a crushing victory over the communists last week's general election, said in an interview yesterday his new government would take up shortly the question of restricting rubber exports. He intimated it would receive top priority. The Socialist Party's 28th National Convention yesterday named Darlington Hoops, 55, a Reading, Pennsylvania attorney, as its candidate for president. Hoops, a veteran of 38 years in the socialist movement, named to his 4th successive term as party chairman earlier in the 3-day meeting that ended yesterday. The Supreme Court meets today for an opinion day session in which it could hand down its ruling on the controversial seizure of the nation's steel industry. There has been no hint when the decision will come, although by the time the court's normal summer session recess is getting short. 2 opinion day sessions have come and gone since the court took the steel case under advisement. The age at which Americans take their marriage vows for the first time is lower than it ever was before, according to the Department of Commerce. For girls, the median age at marriage is 20.4 years. For men, it's 22.6. Those figures apply only to first marriages, according to the department. Those some of the day's top news stories as reported in the newspapers of Monday, June 2nd, 1952, on your radio, radio's outstanding theater of thrill suspense, which continues now on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox.
There was quite a gathering in the cashier's office when we arrived. All the executives for Mr. Waterman's down, and the editor of the store paper wandering through Waterman's. I'd sent an item to him last summer. Mr. Fenton of Cashier's Department spending his 2-week vacation at home. But he never printed it.
Well, come in, Fenton. We've been waiting for our, shall we say, guest of honor.
Me, Mr. Waterman?
You, Fenton. We have a little ceremony which I'd hope to conclude before the lunch hour was over.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Waterman.
Think nothing of it. This is your day, Fenton, your day. Oh, going to get a shot of the 2 of us, Wolf?
Yes, sir, Mr. Waterman. Over by the door?
Oh, if you don't mind, I'd like it sitting at my desk. I feel more, secure there.
By your desk. How's this? Got it? Good. And now, Fenton, we all say farewell to a good and faithful servant, one who has given 30 years of his life as a contribution, however small, to making Waterman's the great institution it is today. Well done, Harold Fenton.
Thank you.
A modest man, but conscientious. His regular comings and goings passed almost unknown to many until his ordeal of 2 days ago. Locked all night in the vault by brutal and rapacious thieves. A night in which, in his own words, he relived each and every day of his 30-year service to Waterman's. Oh, greater devotion hath no man.
Oh, it was nothing, really.
And now, his labor's done, his burden borne, Fenton will live out the rest of his days in ease and comfort, because he has arrived at the retirement age of the Waterman pension plan, by which he will receive
$31.68 a month.
$31.68 a month for as long as he lives.
Thank you.
And now, a little surprise for Harold Fenton. A week ago, in a letter to me, our good and faithful servant asked that on his retirement he be given permission to purchase for his home his old desk.
Well, actually, Mr. Waterman, I don't know what I'd do without it.
Oh, frankly, I put in a lot of thought on this simple request. I weighed the factors in my mind. On the one hand was Fenton's 30-year service. On the other...
Mr. Waterman.
On the other, he was already receiving his pension of, his pension. However...
Please, Mr. Waterman.
However, Fenton, my boy, I decided to go you one better.
One better? Not a new desk.
Nothing so unsentimental. Fenton, instead of allowing you to purchase the desk, I'm giving it to you.
Phew.
All right, boys, right in here. Take the desk wherever Fenton here wants it. And now, back to work, everybody. Month-end clearance today.
Whoops. Easy, men. Don't drop it. Easy.
Fenton, my boy, in the years ahead, when you're seated at your old desk, think of us, won't you?
I certainly will, Mr. Waterman. I certainly will.
Autolite is bringing you Mr. Jack Benny in A Good and Faithful Servant. Tonight's presentation in radio's outstanding theater of thrills, Suspense.
June 2nd, 1952, Suspense on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. We'll start off the first week of June on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox with an episode of Our Miss Brooks starring Eve Arden from 72 years ago, June 3rd, 1952, the first aid course. Miss Brooks has to take over teaching Madison High's first aid course, but first, a test of her abilities. That's coming up on Saturday's Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox, and of course, anytime at classicradio.stream or anywhere podcasts are served by searching for Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Now the conclusion of Suspense, 71 years ago, June 2nd, 1952.
And now, Autolite brings back to our Hollywood soundstage Mr. Jack Benny in Elliot Lewis's production of A Good and Faithful Servant, a tale well calculated to keep you in suspense.
Retirement agreed with me. A walk to the park to see my friends when I felt like it. A leisurely lunch at Elmo's Grotto when I felt like it. And when the need arose, a little gardening. Mother and I were very happy.
You've done enough for one morning, Harold. Your back will go out again.
All through, Mother. Just cleaning off the spade.
What were you planting this morning, Harold?
Mother, if anything should happen to me, knock wood.
Knock wood.
Right in between the beets and the radishes, there's a very rich patch of dirt.
Son, aren't we going to get our little cottage by the lake?
I have to go in town today, Mother. I might just inquire around.
Oh, good.
You know, Mr. Waterman is really a very sweet man. The Waterman pension plan. I just wish I could tell him how happy it's made me. I hadn't told Mother, but Miss Prentice had called that morning. Mr. Cartwright wanted to see me that afternoon at the office, she said. And she asked how I was. What would have happened if I'd asked her to lunch? I almost did, too. In the cashier's office at the store, Miss Prentice smiled when she saw me, and I smiled back. In fact, we struck up quite a conversation.
Oh, Mr. Fenton, how are you?
Fine. Just fine, Miss Prentice.
Retirement agree with you?
Yes, indeed. Fine.
You notice we haven't filled your old job.
No? Oh, yes, indeed.
Haven't been able to find another man of your type.
Well...
Is that you, Fenton? Come on in here.
Coming, Mr. Cartwright.
Sit down, Fenton, sit down.
Thank you.
Just trying to clean up accounts on the robbery. Fenton, what was your final tally again?
50,000, almost exactly, Mr. Cartwright.
You're way off. That doesn't check with my audit at all.
I'm quite sure of my figures.
Well, then you're wrong, that's all. My check shows they got away with 82,000.
82,000?
Right. Now, if you'll just sign the necessary statements corroborating my audit...
I can't do that, Mr. Cartwright.
And just why can't you? Don't you take my word for it?
Frankly, no.
Fenton, look. You're retired. It's nothing to you one way or the other. You just made a little mistake in your figures, that's all.
Mr. Cartwright, are you asking me to help cover up a shortage in your accounts?
All right, Fenton, I'll lay it on the line. Temporarily, I'm a bit short. Involvement with a woman, and you wouldn't understand.
I most certainly wouldn't.
Look, I'll make it worth your while.
Shortages are found out sooner or later, Mr. Cartwright.
All right, if that's your attitude, let me tell you something, Fenton. I don't like the smell of this robbery of yours. I don't like it at all. What do you think of that?
You're implying that I made off with $50,000 belonging to Waterman's?
I think it's highly possible. And how are you so sure it was 50,000?
Supposing me, for one instant, capable of such a thing, Mr. Cartwright, wouldn't I be much too clever to put my head in a noose by covering up for you?
Fenton, if I was talking to an honest man, wouldn't he have taken my story right to Mr. Waterman? I'll give you 5 minutes. Either sign my audit or I go to the police and accuse you of stealing $82,000. Think it over, Fenton.
No question about it. Mr. Cartwright's dishonesty might be a bit awkward for me. My instinct about the man had been thoroughly sound. I had disliked him for 16 years. Well, there was only one safe way out of it.
Well?
Mr. Cartwright, if you need money...
Yes?
Why don't you rob the vault? Actually, it isn't hard at all.
Well, how do I get away with the money?
I'm sorry, I never reveal professional secrets.
Well, then you'll have to help me, Fenton. Lock me in the vault and you get away with the money.
Me?
Sure. Then we're both in the clear for good. Help me out, Fenton.
You mean I'm going to clear out the vault a second time?
You'll never regret it.
Regret it? The fact is, I'd rather enjoy it. We settled on the following Friday. Friday nights, the store stayed open till 9, and they were having a big white sale that day. The money was already stacked on Mr. Cartwright's desk when I got there. It was a juicy haul. I didn't see Mr. Cartwright around, but...
Hello, Mr. Fenton.
Miss Prentice. But the money.
I was listening when you and Mr. Cartwright made your plans, Mr. Fenton, and he caught me and forced me to help him. You understand, Harold. I mean, Mr. Fenton.
Harold. Times like these draw people together quickly, don't you think?
Oh, I do. I really do.
Miss Prentice.
Helen.
Thank you. Helen. Miss Prentice. Mr. Cartwright mentioned a woman in his life. You're not the one?
Harold, of course not.
Excuse me. I just thought... You remember the office party last Christmas?
Oh, that? Well, that was just because he was under the mistletoe. And if you'd been under it instead of Mr. Cartwright...
Really? Well...
Oh, Fenton, you're here. Good. Anybody see you come up?
It doesn't matter, really, Mr. Cartwright. Might even be better that way. Then you and Miss Prentice can say that I left minutes before the bandits arrived.
You're right, of course, Harold.
Thank you. Are you ready, Mr. Cartwright? I brought some wrapping paper for the money. Even brought along a handle with care sticker. That's the Fenton touch, you know.
Get on with it, will you?
No need to be nervous. There. Neat? I spent 8 years in wrapping and mailing.
All right. You know what to do with it, Helen.
I know.
Just a minute, Mr. Cartwright. I'm to take the money, remember?
There's been a change, Fenton. We rewrote the script.
You think that's wise? To fly in the face of my experience?
Now, look, Fenton, we're not children. You lock us in the vault and take off with the money. You think we'd ever see you again?
Well, you're questioning my honesty? I'm sure Miss Prentice will vouch for me. We're rather good friends. Miss Prentice. Helen.
Unfortunately for you, Fenton, Helen's on my side. Now, if you wouldn't mind getting into the vault, huh?
Me? In the vault? But...
This is a loaded gun, Fenton. Get in the vault.
But...
You came back for a second helping, that's all. The Confederate got away with the money, but I courageously slammed the vault door on you and went for help.
But...
Will they believe me? I imagine they'll find 50,000 somewhere around your house. They'll believe me.
Helen. I see.
I'm sorry, Harold. It's a nasty trick, but we're nasty people. You should have stuck to squirrels.
Just one thing, Fenton. How did you ever get that 50,000 out of here the first time?
How? Well, I didn't, Mr. Cartwright.
You didn't?
Then where is it?
It's still in the vault.
I don't believe it.
Oh, it's quite cleverly hidden. It took me most of that night. I was locked in.
Get in there and show me.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cartwright.
Get in there.
No. I went through a lot for that money, Mr. Cartwright. 30 years. I just as soon you shot me.
Helen, hold the gun on him. I'm going in and look.
Well, don't be long. What if somebody should walk in?
I'll be able to see if he's lying. Just watch him.
You see anything?
Not yet. I don't think it's possible that... Open the door so I can get some more light.
Must be true. Crime changes people. I had never lied, yet I lied to Cartwright. I never used violence, yet I got behind Helen and...
Hey!
I guess I'll go home. Mother will be wondering what's happened to me.
Some more cereal, Harold?
I don't think so, Mother. Thanks. What time is it?
8:10, son.
Well, they would have opened the vault at 8 this morning. The police should be here any minute.
Are you sure those two will implicate you, Harold?
It seems likely, Mother. The gun would be hard to explain. And I think Miss Prentice will turn on Mr. Cartwright after a night in the vault.
Yes, she's just the type.
I'm sorry, Mother. I guess I just don't know much about women.
It's all right, son. You think they'll be hard on you?
Not very. I haven't spent any of the money. The insurance companies always look kindly on such cases. There they are.
Harold, how long?
2 years, Mother. Maybe less. Maybe even 1.
It's still a long time.
A long time? After 30 years in Waterman's? Hardly. I'll get the door.
Suspense. Suspense is produced and directed by Elliot Lewis, with music composed by Lucian Morowick and conducted by Lud Gluskin. A Good and Faithful Servant was written for Suspense by Richard M. Powell. Portions of this program were transcribed. In tonight's cast, Norma Varden was heard as Mrs. Fenton, Doris Singleton as Helen, Gerald Moore as Mr. Cartwright, Joseph Kearns as Mr. Waterman, Hy Averback as Lieutenant Miller, and Charles Calvert as Mr. Wolfe.
The second of 4 appearances by Jack Benny on Suspense, as it was originally broadcast 71 years ago, June 2nd, 1952, A Good and Faithful Servant. Thank you for tuning in to Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Visit our webpage, classicradio.stream. Stream our shows. See a list of places where our shows are available by a podcast. You can learn about building a classic radio collection of your own. You can find our social media links. And if you'd like to support our broadcast, you can buy me a copy. The Buy Me a Copy money helps us acquire additional classic radio collections and helps us maintain our distribution channels. That's at classicradio.stream. And by all means, tell all your friends the greatest radio shows of all time are right here at this spot on the dial. Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite station. Have yourself a great weekend, won't you?